Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. Class is in session. This is the first installment of the Life of Books series. And first, our word of the day is the word holograph. Holograph is a noun and it means a document that is written in someone's handwriting. So this is related to the word autograph, except it's more than just a signature. It is the entire document in handwriting. And I have something to show you later, which is a holograph. So this first installment of the series will be about a lecture that I attended a few years ago at the university where I teach. We had a visiting scholar by the name of Tom Mole, who came to us from across the pond. He was a professor, and probably still is, at the University of Edinburgh, at the center of the history of books, or history of the book. I can't remember the exact phrasing of the center. His lecture was fascinating. He basically studies books as objects, where literature professors study books as meaning and message. And so I wanted to kind of summarize what he talked about and share a little bit of my interpretation and application of what he said in my own life. First, Dr. Mole explained that books are our physical companions throughout our lives. Our first experience with books is as infants, and we have a very tactile experience with books, intensely tactile. We chew books as infants, and we lick them, and we throw them, and we feel textures on them, and we step on them. It's very much our engagement with the book is not so much an engagement with its message, but an engagement with the book as an object. And as we grow older, we tend to look past the objectness of a book and focus more on its meaning and its message. So I remember going through quite an impoverished period in college where I did not care what books looked like. I bought every beat up and mangled book I could afford at the library book sales. And I've been kind of slowly culling those shelves in recent years so that I can replace them with better looking books. And at first I was a little ashamed of that because I thought it really wasn't the outside of the book that I should be worrying about. Don't judge a book by its cover, but we totally do. So I think we kind of weave in and out of this engagement with books as objects and engagement with books as messages. Books are often given as gifts, especially at transitional times in our lives, graduation gifts or coming of age gifts. I remember my parents giving me a journal when I turned 8. And I remember that my parents' attempt at the birds and the bees talk was to hand me a book. And I have this gorgeous edition of an Emerson collection of poems with lovely gilt gold pages, kind of maybe a leather cover. Shows just a tiny bit of wear. But this was a gift given to my great-great-grandmother Grace when she was 16 for Christmas. So books are often given, and they have always been given throughout different periods of book existence as gifts. The object that we pass to another is an attempt to share something with them, right? To give them knowledge, to bless them with wisdom. Books have various roles throughout our lives. As a child, my books were often my companions. I would always carry a book or 2 or 3 or 5 to school in my backpack. Whether or not I had time to read it during the day, I wanted to have those books near me. And in college, my books became my lovers. I remember teasing people about falling asleep on a book as they were studying, and ooh, how romantic that was. And now books are kind of a source of prestige for me, and they're slowly becoming companions again, especially during the pandemic, where I'm finding a lot of comfort and camaraderie in the books that I read. Sometimes I'll just go down to my office where I have my favorite books, and I'll just sit to be with my books. I'm not really reading them. I'm just experiencing life with them. So it's very fascinating to me that we have these different relationships with books as objects throughout our lives. And I used to be very not picky at all about book covers. Now I'm super picky. I used to dog ear. I know I'm going to be like shunned from booktube, but I used to dog ear books all the time, and I don't do that as much because I'm trying to preserve the objectness of the books that I read. So that's an interesting change in my own relationship with books. Also, the way that I organize my books it kind of reflects my relationship with them. So the books on my main floor, where guests are more likely to see them, where they are more likely to sit, maybe look at my shelves, those books are actually arranged by color to create a certain aesthetic in the room. I have my purple shelf, and my bright orange shelf, and my brown shelf, and my white shelf. And then I have a separate bookshelf for my seafoam green books, which I found that I had an awful lot of. And it's just, I love looking at those shelves. And for me, it's a source of decoration and prestige. I feel quite proud of the books in my main floor. In my basement and my bedroom, where guests usually don't go, I have organized my books by genre. So those books for me are more about their message and their meaning to me than they are about the appearance. Although I do usually arrange them within the genre so that they're at their most attractive arrangement. So it still does, matter. The appearance does matter to me still. Dr. Mole talked also about books as connection devices. So we usually think of books as solitary objects. We read them alone, although that has totally been changing during the pandemic as we are gathering on live streams to have people read to us. But generally, books are thought of as a solitary kind of reading activities. And Dr. Mole kind of tried to change that concept, that myth maybe, of books as divisive, and instead talked about books as ways of connecting to others. When we read a book, we are in a way sharing an experience with all the other people who have read that book. And when you have a used book, you get to share the experience of previous readers. One of my favorite things to do is to flip through a used book and find all of the little paraphernalia that got left in the book when they donated it or got rid of it. I love seeing the different strange items that people use as bookmarks. I found all sorts of things, and I always keep those little bookmarks, and I usually keep them with the book, maybe in the front or back cover, maybe in a certain page if that person had marked it clearly for some reason. I want to maintain what has happened to the object of that book, because it does influence the meaning and the message of the book, in my opinion. You also get to engage with the marginalia that people leave in used books. The little notes, the underlining, the all sorts of markings. I have a classic book that someone has written "ha ha" in tiny penciled letters at every funny part of the book. And when I read it, I feel like I'm laughing with that person about the same joke. So Dr. Mole said that our bookshelves are haunted by other readers. And that's such a tantalizing statement, but I think it's totally true. One book for me that is haunted by previous readers is the one I showed you earlier that belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Grace. It has preserved. So it was given to her in 1903, and it has preserved her mother's handwriting. So this would be my great, great, great grandmother, Nancy Jane, left this beautiful message for her daughter Grace on Christmas. She has a little note in the back as well, and she wrote a snippet of her favorite poem. Pride ruined the angels, their shame them restores, and the joy that is sweetest lurks in strings of remorse. So I'm learning something about my ancestors, and her mother was a woman named Nancy Jane. She was a feisty, redheaded descendant of Irish immigrants, but she was clearly very educated. Her handwriting is beautiful and lacy, and she was acquainted with Emerson's poetry. This book now carries totally different meaning for me than any other collection of Emerson poems because of the object and what has happened to the object of the book. And now, when I read it, I am not only reading it with Grace, who owned the book, but also Nancy Jane, her mother, who gave her the book, and my own grandmother, who gave me the book. And I have in here a holograph of my ancestor, all written in her handwriting. When I read with my grandmother and Grace and Nancy Jane, the gap of 100 years between us closes. Dear reader, thankfully, 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 there is always another book.